The growl was low, guttural, nothing like the usual alert barks Max gave when a raccoon scuttled across the yard or a delivery truck passed too close to the driveway. It was a warning, raw and vibrating with urgency. Natalie bolted upright, her breath catching. Her eyes darted to the end of the bed where Max usually slept. Empty. A beat later, she saw him. The German Shepherd stood rigid at the cracked open door to Skylar's nursery, his body tensed, fur bristling like static. The hallway was lit only by the moonlight filtering through the kitchen skylight, casting long shadows down the hallway. "Max," Natalie whispered, heart pounding. She slid her legs off the bed, her feet brushing the cool floor. Max didn't respond. He was already slipping into the nursery. Behind her, Eli stirred and mumbled something. Then came the sound that would never leave Natalie's mind, the tearing of fabric and the sharp gasp of air from her husband. "Max, no!" Eli's voice broke the stillness, full of fear, not command. Natalie ran. She reached the nursery in time to see Max clenching the back of Skylar's sleep onesie in his teeth, carefully pulling the 9-month-old from the crib. The baby whimpered but didn't cry, as if sensing something neither adult could. Max turned and bolted down the hallway, Skylar dangling gently in his jaw. Natalie screamed. Eli stumbled behind her, barefoot, eyes wide with disbelief. They chased the dog through the living room. The baby gate was down, the back door somehow cracked open. Max didn't pause. He charged out into the dew-soaked grass, Skylar still in his grip. The yard was silent except for the ragged breaths of 2 terrified parents. "Drop her!" Eli bellowed. Max didn't drop her. He sprinted. Then the night exploded. The force of the blast hurled Natalie and Eli forward. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. A blinding light swallowed the house as flames erupted through the roof and tore through the walls in one horrific moment. Natalie hit the ground hard, the back of her head bouncing against the lawn. Her ears rang. Her body went numb. The roar of fire was all around her. Skylar. She forced her arms to move, rolling onto her side. Smoke curled into the sky like a black signal of everything they'd just lost. The porch was gone. The windows blown out. The nursery, Skylar's nursery, reduced to burning timbers. A cry pierced through the chaos. Not a human cry. A bark. It was Max. Natalie pushed herself up. Her palms were scraped, her breath short and panicked. Across the yard, beyond the flickering reach of the flames, she saw him. Max stood over Skylar's small body, placing himself between the baby and the inferno. His ears were pinned back. His chest heaved. His front paw was scorched, bent oddly, but he stood his ground like a soldier who had sworn never to retreat. Natalie scrambled to her feet and staggered toward them. Eli was already there, hands trembling as he scooped Skylar into his arms. The baby was crying now, a loud, healthy wail that cut through the night like salvation. "She's okay," Eli said in disbelief. She's okay." Max collapsed beside them, his body twitching with adrenaline and smoke inhalation. Natalie knelt beside him, her fingers running through the singed fur around his neck. "You saved her," she whispered. "You saved all of us." Fire trucks wailed in the distance, still too far. Neighbors were emerging from their homes in various stages of panic and confusion. A few cell phones were already pointed in their direction. But Natalie wasn't looking at the fire or the flashing lights. She was looking at Max. His eyes, tired, dark, watchful, were locked on Skylar. Even in agony, he never looked away from the baby. Eli crouched beside them, still clutching Skylar. He glanced at the smoldering wreckage of their house, then back at the dog he had once doubted. "I was going to send him away," Eli murmured. "I didn't trust him." "I thought he was acting out." Natalie's voice broke as she shook her head. "He was warning us." A firefighter finally arrived, breathless and pale. Everyone accounted for? He called out. Eli raised a hand. We're all here. Thanks to him, the firefighter looked at Max, eyes narrowing. That's a German Shepherd, right? Looks trained, Natalie nodded. We rescued him. Got him from the shelter. Never knew much about his past. The firefighter studied Max a little longer, then gave a slow, respectful nod. Well, seems like he never forgot his job. Natalie didn't speak. Her hand rested on Max's chest, rising and falling, slower now but steady. And in that moment, she realized something chilling. Max had known, not guessed, not sensed. He had known the explosion was coming, but how? The answer wouldn't come until later. Until the reports, until the microchip scan, until a quiet deputy named Reyes asked a few too many questions. But for now, all that mattered was that Max had barked not for attention, not from fear, but to warn. And when no one listened, he acted. He took the baby at 3 a.m. and saved them all. The fire was out by sunrise, but the questions were just beginning. Natalie sat on the curb, barefoot and shivering under the scratchy emergency blanket. Skylar slept against her chest, wrapped in a smoke-scented towel, oblivious to the ruin that used to be their home. Just hours earlier, she had been sleeping in her crib. Now that crib was a blackened pile of melted wood and ash. Eli stood nearby, arms crossed, staring at what was left of their living room, wall-charred framing, warped beams, and the twisted remains of their coffee table. His eyes were locked on a firefighter speaking to the arson investigator, but his thoughts were elsewhere. How the hell did he know? He muttered. Natalie looked up. Who? He turned, voice hoarse. Maximum. How did he know the house was going to blow? Neither of them had an answer. The fire chief confirmed the blast had come from a gas leak, possibly from the kitchen line. He said it was a miracle anyone got out alive. What he didn't say, but everyone was thinking, was that Max had somehow known before it happened. Back at the fire truck, one of the EMTs had patched up Max's burned paw. The dog lay quietly on a blanket now, his breathing shallow, but his eyes never drifting far from Skylar. The EMT said it was unusual. Most dogs freak out after something like this. This one, it's like he's still on duty. Natalie tucked Skylar in tighter and looked over at Max. On duty. The phrase stuck in her mind. Later that day, once the sun had climbed high and the smoke had cleared, Natalie and Eli sat in the back of the fire chief's SUV filling out incident reports. Max, bandaged and exhausted, lay curled at their feet. A young officer named Reyes approached with a scanner. Mind if I scan the chip? He asked, crouching beside Max. Might help us get some background. Eli blinked. He's chipped? Natalie nodded slowly. The shelter scanned him when we adopted. But they only gave us his name and basic age. Said his past records were lost. Reyes frowned. That's unusual. The scanner beeped. A number flashed across the screen. Reyes narrowed his eyes and stepped away, muttering something into his radio. 10 minutes later, he returned, looking more alert than before. I passed this to someone at the county, he said carefully. This ID isn't from the local shelter system. It's from a federal registry Natalie set up. Federal? You mean like military? Reyes hesitated. Could be. Or law enforcement. The chip format matches dogs used in government K9 programs. Eli stared at Max. You're telling me this dog might have been trained as a working dog? Reyes nodded. There's a chance. A good one. They both looked at Max, now dozing in the sun, head resting between his paws. For a moment, he seemed like any other dog. But now there were too many signs they hadn't noticed before. Natalie spoke first. There were things. Little things. Like how he always checked the windows before lying down, how he'd sit by the front door for hours if a delivery truck had been there. Eli added. And he reacts hard to smells. Last month he growled at the neighbor's gas grill like it was about to attack. They looked at each other, and the pieces started to click into place. This wasn't just a smart dog. Max had been trained. Later that night, after a temporary hotel room was arranged by the Red Cross, Natalie sat with Max on the floor, running her fingers through his coarse fur. His paw was swollen, but healing. Skylar slept safely in the crib provided by volunteers. Eli stood at the window, scrolling through his phone. Then he froze. "Nat," he said, "you need to see this." He handed her the phone. It was a photo from a K9 memorial page dated 4 years ago. The caption read, "K9 units retired after joint operations overseas." In the picture, 5 German shepherds sat lined up in front of a sand-colored military tent. One of them, on the far left, had eyes so sharp and familiar that Natalie's breath caught in her throat. It was Max. Same scar above the eye, same intense gaze. "He was in the military," she whispered. Eli nodded. "Looks like it." There was no name listed, no handler, just the unit code, D6RC. Natalie looked at Max again. But now she saw more than a family pet. She saw a dog who had once served, once fought, once protected. And somehow, even after being dumped in a shelter, even after being forgotten by the very system he served, Max had never stopped watching, never stopped protecting. He had saved their daughter, not by accident, not by instinct, by training, by decision. A beat passed. Then Natalie asked the question that had been clawing at her since the explosion. What if the gas leak wasn't an accident? Eli didn't answer right away, but the stiffness in his shoulders gave him away. He had been thinking the same thing. Too many things didn't add up. The smell of gas had been faint at best. They had no issues with the stove, no recent service calls. The timing, the way Max had reacted, it was all too precise. And if Max had smelled something no one else did? Maybe it hadn't been just a gas leak. Maybe it had been placed, planned. As Natalie looked down at Max, whose breathing had steadied into a slow rhythm, one final thought surfaced. It was terrifying, but it was real. What if whoever tried to kill them hadn't accounted for the dog? And what if Max knew exactly who it was? It didn't take long for the questions to turn inward. 2 days after the explosion, a white pickup truck from the county fire marshal's office pulled up outside the charred remains of the Powell home. The official cause was still listed as undetermined pending investigation, but unofficially, whispers had already started. Natalie stood beside Eli as the investigator, a woman named Deanna Wolfe, clicked through photos on her tablet. She wore a fireproof jacket even though the heat had long faded from the wreckage. Her tone was calm, but her words cut like ice. "You said there were no recent repairs or issues with the gas lines, but our preliminary review shows non-standard parts on the water heater. Can you explain that?" Eli shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, I installed it myself a few months back. It was a used unit, nothing fancy, just something to get us through winter. The old one was leaking, and the plumber quoted $3,000. Natalie turned to him, eyes narrowing. "You never told me that." He avoided her gaze. "Didn't think it mattered." "It was solid. I checked all the lines. It was fine. Deanna didn't react. She just tapped something on the tablet. We'll need to pull the serial number and trace the install. There's a chance improper fitting led to the leak. That kind of DIY work complicates things, especially with insurance." "Are you saying this was Eli's fault?" Natalie asked sharply. "I'm saying we have to follow the evidence." After she left, the silence between them was thicker than the ash covering their yard. That night at the hotel, Skylar was restless in her crib. Eli sat at the desk with his head in his hands while Natalie paced the room. On the floor between them, Max shifted, but didn't sleep. His bandaged paw twitched occasionally, a reflex maybe, or something deeper. Natalie finally stopped and looked at Eli. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie," he muttered. "I just didn't tell you." "That's the same thing." "You put our daughter at risk. You could have killed her." Eli looked up, eyes raw. "I was trying to save us money, Nat." "We were barely making mortgage. You knew that. I didn't think—" "No, you didn't," she snapped. "And now everyone thinks it was your screw-up." Eli stood, anger rising. "What do you want me to say?" "That I'm sorry?" "I am. I messed up. But don't pretend like you've been perfect." "Excuse me? You didn't even want Max, remember? You fought me on keeping him. Said he was too big. Too much work. Now suddenly he's a hero and I'm the one everyone wants to blame." Natalie's voice broke. "Because he is a hero. He saved Skylar. You almost got her killed." Eli took a step back like he'd been slapped. Max growled softly. The room went still. Eli looked down at the dog. "Really? You too." Max didn't move, just stared. A knock broke the tension. Natalie opened the door to find a man in a polo shirt and khakis holding a clipboard. His ID tag read Animal Control. Travis Bain. "Evening, Mom. Sorry to bother you. We received a call from the fire investigator. Said the dog on scene exhibited some highly unusual behavior prior to the blast. I'm here to bring him in for a short behavioral assessment. Just routine. He'll be returned in 72 hours. Natalie blinked. "You're taking Max?" "It's not a punishment. It's just protocol. When animals act outside expected parameters, like dragging a child from a house before a gas leak, triggers our department has to ensure the behavior isn't tied to trauma, aggression, or, 'He saved our daughter.'" She snapped. "I don't doubt that. But if you want your insurance claim to move forward, and if there's even a remote chance the dog's behavior is questioned in court, we need official evaluation." Max stepped beside Natalie, alert, like he sensed what was coming. Travis hesitated. "Mom, we can do this the easy way." Eli exhaled. "Just go with them." "It's only a few days. We'll get him back." Natalie dropped to her knees beside Max. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'll come get you." I promise Max didn't resist as Travis clipped on the leash. But when they reached the hallway, Max turned back once, eyes locking with Skylar's crib. The moment lingered like a held breath. By morning, news had leaked. The town Facebook group lit up. Someone had snapped a photo of Max being led out by Animal Control. A caption beneath read, "Dog involved in house explosion taken for aggression tests." It didn't matter that it was inaccurate. The damage was done. "Dog was acting weird." One comment read, "Wouldn't surprise me if he smelled drugs or something." Another chimed in, "Maybe the dog caused the blast?" "Can't trust those high-strung breeds." Natalie closed her phone in disgust. At the local grocery store, two women by the produce aisle hushed when she passed. One of them gave a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Still staying at the Bayview Inn?" The woman asked. "Heard the insurance folks are dragging their feet." "Shame, really. But I suppose it's lucky your dog was there. Or maybe not." Natalie walked away before she could say something she'd regret. At night, Skylar cried without Max. Natalie couldn't sleep. Eli barely spoke. Fault lines had opened between them, small fractures that the fire hadn't caused, but had exposed. On the third night without Max, Natalie sat alone, scrolling through every old photo they had of him. There was one that stopped her cold. Max curled up beside Skylar's crib, eyes open, alert. The timestamp showed it had been taken at 2:58 a.m., 2 nights before the explosion. He'd already sensed something, already watching. Not just a pet, a sentinel. She whispered into the darkness. "What were you trying to warn us about, Max?" And somewhere across town, In a quiet kennel at Animal Control, Max lay awake. He wasn't barking, but he wasn't sleeping either. Deputy Miguel Reyes wasn't supposed to be at the shelter that day. He'd just wrapped a double shift helping direct traffic around the scorched shell of the Powell house, and had planned to head home for a cold beer and maybe 2 hours of sleep before another call came in. But a text from a buddy at Animal Control changed that. "Got a weird one here. You used to work with K9’s, right? Come take a look. Something about this dog's eyes. Too alert. Too trained." That last word got Reyes' attention. Most dogs at the county shelter had the 1,000-yard stare of the discarded. Not this one, apparently. He arrived late in the afternoon. The shelter buzzed with activity kids looking to adopt, volunteers washing metal bowls, an intern trying to untangle 2 leashes. Reyes flashed his badge and was led through a side gate to the back kennels. Max was in the last run. The German shepherd sat perfectly still, not pacing, not barking, just watching. His ears perked the moment Reyes approached. "Here he is," said the tech, glancing at his notes. "German shepherd mix, no microchip. Picked up after that explosion in Fairgrove. Family says he saved their kid, but some folks think he might have triggered something. Weird thing is, he hasn't made a sound since arriving. Not once." Reyes crouched slowly and locked eyes with the dog. Max didn't flinch. "What's his name?" Reyes asked. "Max." The deputy held out the back of his hand. Max sniffed once, then sat straighter. Reyes didn't move. He just studied the dog's posture, legs tight, chest forward, neck slightly arched. It was the stance of readiness. Not fear, not anxiety. Readiness. "Show me his intake notes," Reyes said. Inside the office, the tech handed over a manila folder. It was too thin. No vet history, no adoption trail. Reyes murmured. "Came in 6 months ago as a stray." "Yep, found near an industrial lot south of town. Malnourished but no broken bones. No tattoo, no collar. Just..." Walked into the yard and sat at the gate. "Did he react to any other animals?" "Didn't even look at the others." But he barked loud when a staffer came near a storage room that ended up having a leaking propane tank. Reyes paused. "Wait, say that again?" The tech looked up from the screen. "Yeah, one of our guys was going in to clean, and Max lost it. Barking, ramming the door. Turns out there was a slow leak behind a wall panel. Whole place could have gone up. We thought it was just a coincidence Reyes stood up slowly. That wasn't coincidence. That's training. That was a targeted alert." The tech frowned. "You mean like a detection dog?" "Exactly like one. But here's the thing. Narcotics dogs don't react to propane. Bomb dogs don't bark at gas leaks. Search and rescue dogs wouldn't act that way either. But there's one class of dogs that might. Hazmat detection units. And those aren't handed out to civilians." He stepped back outside, returned to Max's kennel, and whistled once. A low, sharp note. Max stood immediately and trotted to the gate. Reyes reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He jingled them twice, then dropped them. Max didn't break eye contact. Then Reyes tried something else. "Sit." Max sat. "Down." Max dropped flat. "Stay." Max froze. Reyes whispered, more to himself than to the dog. "Who the hell trained you?" He called Natalie from the parking lot. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Reyes, Fairgrove County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling about your dog, Max." Her voice tightened immediately. "What happened? Did something go wrong at the shelter?" "No, ma'am. Quite the opposite. I think your dog might have saved more than just your daughter, and I think I might know why he drove over that evening." Natalie met him at the hotel lobby, still in yesterday's clothes, Skylar asleep in a stroller beside her. Eli didn't join. He hadn't spoken much since the insurance news broke. Reyes sat across from her with a folder and a tablet. "You said you adopted Max from the Crescent Valley Rescue?" "Yes. He showed up there with no background, just wandered in, Did they mention if he responded to any commands? We didn't really test him. He was quiet, watched a lot, slept by Skylar's crib after the first night. Reyes nodded, tapping the screen. I've worked with military K9’s, and I've seen dogs like this before. Max doesn't just respond to basic commands, he reacts like a trained responder. He exhibits what we call operational stillness. He conserves energy, watches, assesses threats, and his alerts barking moving people out of danger zones are deliberate, not random. Natalie leaned forward, brows drawn. So what are you saying? I'm saying Max wasn't a stray. Someone trained him. And not just any training, specialized training. Possibly military or federal. But how did he end up at a shelter? Reyes shook his head. That's what I want to find out. He pushed over a photo. It was grainy surveillance footage. A man in a hoodie, leaving a dog just outside a chain-link fence. The timestamp read 6 months earlier. I pulled this from a scrapyard near the rescue's property. It's the same night Max showed up. The camera's too low-res for facial ID, but the build matches someone I've seen before. An ex-contractor. Discharged for whistleblowing on a chemical weapons training site in Utah. Natalie swallowed hard. You think this is connected to Max? I think Max saw things no one wanted seen. And whoever dumped him didn't count on him surviving. There was a long pause. Skylar stirred in her sleep. Reyes added quietly. And I think your house was targeted. Natalie's breath caught. You think someone tried to kill us? Or tried to kill Max? She stared at him, stunned. But why now? Why wait 6 months? I don't know. Reyes admitted. But if Max alerted to a gas leak, and if that leak wasn't accidental, then someone knew exactly where to place it, and they knew Max would warn you. He leaned forward. But what they didn't count on is that you'd listen. Natalie looked down at the photo of Max. The shelter. The scars that hadn't made sense before. The way he positioned himself between Skylar and the front door every night. He hadn't barked out of fear. He'd barked because it was his job, and now someone was trying to silence him. Deputy Reyes stood. I'm going to keep digging. And I'm going to get Max released by morning. But I need you to be careful. Watch Skylar. Watch each other. Natalie nodded slowly. And Max? Reyes smiled faintly. Max'll watch everything else. The scanner beeped once short, sharp, unmistakable. Deputy Reyes held it steady over the small patch of scar tissue on Max's shoulder. The shelter volunteer leaned in, eyes narrowing. I thought they said he didn't have a chip. They did, Reyes said, voice low. But it's there. Deep. Someone didn't want it found. He jotted down the 15-digit code flashing on the screen and moved quickly. The database wasn't public, but Reyes still had friends at the state K9 training center in Castaic. He texted the code and waited. 2 minutes later, his phone buzzed. Unknown chip match ghost assigned unit. Classified handler, NA status, disqualified, behavioral division, specialized hazmat detection. Final note, too independent, does not respond to standard control, highly alert, potential risk of deviation from command protocol. Reyes exhaled slowly, then whispered, So your name was Ghost. Max, sitting beside him, didn't move, but his ears twitched. Just a flicker. Back in his cruiser, Reyes stared at the report again. Max Ghost had been part of an experimental hazmat K9 unit based in Nevada, trained to detect volatile gases invisible to human senses. They were high-caliber dogs, rare, expensive, built for war zones and industrial sabotage sites. And Max had been too independent? That didn't make sense. Most dogs washed out because they were anxious or couldn't handle the pressure. But independence? That wasn't failure. That was personality. That was instinct. That was choice. Reyes dialed Natalie. "I found something," he said without preamble. "Max isn't Max." His name was Ghost. He was trained as a hazmat detection K9, probably one of 5 in the whole region. There was silence on the other end. "Are you saying he's government property?" He was. But he was discharged. Official reason? Behavioral? But unofficially? It looks more like a cover. Natalie's voice was quiet. "You think they threw him away?" "I think someone didn't like that he didn't follow orders blindly." That night, Reyes returned to the hotel where Natalie and Eli had moved temporarily. He brought the report, printouts, and the chip scanner. Eli looked pale, bags under his eyes. He barely said a word as Reyes laid out everything. Natalie traced her fingers across the black and white photo of a younger Max Ghost, wearing a tactical harness marked with a red warning patch. "Do not interfere. Hazmat unit." "I knew there was something about him," she said softly. "That night, when he barked, it wasn't panicked, it was targeted." He pulled Skylar to the corner of the room before the explosion, not just out of the room. "To the farthest point, exactly," Reyes said. "He was doing pattern response. That's part of their advanced training. Move the vulnerable, then signal for help. And his silence after that." Reyes looked at Max, now curled up on the rug beside Skylar's travel crib. "It's part of his conditioning. These dogs don't bark unless it matters. He warned you. And once he did his job, he shut up." Eli finally spoke. "So what triggered the gas leak?" Reyes shook his head. "Still unclear. But here's the other twist. Max wasn't officially returned to any shelter. The paper trail ends the day he was discharged. But somehow, he ended up dumped behind a run-down rescue center in Crescent Valley. That kind of disappearance, that's not bureaucratic laziness. That's intentional." He paused, letting the silence settle. Natalie's voice dropped. "So, whoever got rid of him didn't want anyone to know he existed. And now," Reyes added, "they may know where he ended up." Max stirred slightly. "I'll file a protection alert," Reyes said. "No one gets to take him without your consent." Eli nodded, still looking dazed. "He saved my daughter." "They'd have to kill me first." Natalie stood, walked to the window, looked out over the dark parking lot. "All this time I thought we adopted a broken stray." Reyes rose too. "You adopted a soldier." For a long moment, no one said anything. The only sound was Max breathing. Then Natalie turned back, eyes steady. "So what do we do now?" Reyes handed her the file. "We figure out who tried to erase him and why he barked that night." Later that night, Natalie stayed up reading the training protocols Reyes left behind. Every line felt like a revelation. Ghost was trained to detect shifts in gas pressure down to the parts per billion range. He had protocols for warning children first. He was conditioned to sit, not bark, when he suspected a threat unless time was running out. The sudden lunge, the furious bark, the way Max pinned himself between the source and Skylar. It wasn't random. It was execution of a mission, one he'd been trained for, one he wasn't supposed to be alive to carry out anymore. She looked down at Max Ghost and whispered, "I'm sorry they threw you away." Max lifted his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her, then rested it on her foot, and for the first time in days, Natalie didn't feel afraid. Somewhere out there, someone wanted him silenced. But here, tonight, in this small, borrowed hotel room, a little girl breathed easy because he hadn't been. Because one dog cast aside for being too independent had refused to forget who he was. Ghost didn't need a handler, he needed a mission. And maybe, just maybe, he'd found it again. It started with a report, just a simple file, delivered in an unmarked envelope to the county fire marshal's office. The inspector flipped through it once, then again. Photos, diagrams, installation timestamps, a receipt from a discount hardware site, and a name, Elijah Monroe. By the next morning, the news reached Deputy Reyes. He showed up at the hotel unannounced. Natalie answered the door, still in pajamas, Skylar clinging to her hip. Reyes didn't smile. "We need to talk." Inside, Natalie listened in silence as Reyes laid out what the fire department's investigation had uncovered. The gas leak hadn't been a freak accident. It hadn't come from a cracked pipe or faulty city connection. It came from a makeshift generator setup in the garage. A DIY install unregistered, uninspected, and dangerously close to the nursery wall. Eli had rigged it himself. Natalie froze. That can't be right. Eli's not careless. He wouldn't, but Reyes wasn't accusing. He was showing evidence. His prints are on the tools. The parts were ordered under his name. The timeline matches the leak. The entire unit wasn't legal. Eli walked in behind them, eyes heavy, shoulders slumped. "I didn't know it would spread like that," he said quietly. "It was supposed to be backup, just in case we lost power again." "You didn't tell me," Natalie said, voice trembling. "I was going to. I just didn't want you to worry." "You didn't want me to stop you," she snapped. "That's what this is." "You hid it because you knew it was stupid. I thought I had it under control." Reyes stood. "I have to report this, Eli." The DA's reviewing it now. It could be a misdemeanor charge, negligent endangerment, maybe reckless installation. Either way, there will be consequences. Eli didn't argue. He just nodded. That night, Natalie packed 2 bags. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She handed Skylar her blanket, kissed her on the forehead, and buckled her into the car seat. Max jumped in the back without being asked. Eli followed her out. His voice cracked. "Are you leaving me?" She turned, eyes glassy. "I need to keep my daughter safe. And right now, I don't know how to do that with you." Max barked once, a sharp, deliberate sound. Not angry, just final. Natalie drove off without looking back. 3 days later, the paperwork was finalized. Max, formerly Ghost, was recognized by the state K9 Association as a retired hazmat detection K9. Reyes pulled strings, pushed through forgotten files, and convinced his old mentor in Reno to sign off on the classification. They sent a certificate, a new tag, and a folded American flag in a box that was probably meant for a funeral. Natalie placed the box in the living room, right above the fireplace in her sister's guest house, where they were now staying. Skylar pointed at it. "Doggy?" Natalie smiled softly. "That's for Max." He was lying near the front door, tail gently thumping against the wood floor, every time Skylar said his name. Meanwhile, the fallout for Eli unfolded quietly. He cooperated with authorities, paid the fine, signed the affidavit admitting negligence, and faced public embarrassment when a local news station ran a story about DIY disasters that nearly killed families. He called every night. Natalie didn't answer for a week. On the 8th day, she picked up. "I'm not ready," she said before he could speak. "I understand," Eli said, "but I'm getting help. Therapy. I want to be better. For her. For you." For myself, Natalie didn't respond, but she didn't hang up either. Max listened from the hall, ears twitching. Later that night, Reyes visited the guest house. "I brought someone," he said, motioning to the woman behind him, a K9 behaviorist from the same unit where Max had been trained. She knelt in front of him, offered her palm. "Ghost," she said. Max didn't react. "Max," Natalie corrected gently. At the sound of his new name, Max stood, walked forward, nudged her hand with his nose. The behaviorist smiled. "He's moved on." "That's rare. Most of them stay frozen in their old commands. But he's chosen you." Natalie swallowed hard. "You're not just his owner," the woman added. "You're his mission now." As the sun set outside the window, Max curled at Skylar's feet while she played with her puzzle pieces. Natalie sat across the room, her laptop open, a document half-finished. The headline read, "What happens when you adopt a dog who was never meant to be adopted?" She stared at the blinking cursor. Max lifted his head, watching her. "You're not done, huh?" she whispered. His tail wagged once. Natalie looked down at the phone beside her. Eli's name hovered on the screen. His latest voicemail left unheard. Then she opened a new paragraph and typed, "He didn't bark to make noise. He barked to save us. And in doing so, he exposed everything we didn't want to see." Max lowered his head again, eyes on the door, as if waiting. Not for danger this time, but for the next choice. The first article dropped on a quiet Wednesday. "Family dog saves child from gas leak turns out. He was a rejected police K9." By Thursday, it was everywhere. Local news stations ran segments with looping footage of Max sitting calmly on the porch of the guest house. They used the photo Reyes had taken. Max's head cocked, eyes alert, ears up like a soldier waiting for orders. Natalie didn't ask for attention. She certainly didn't want the calls. But they came anyway. Animal behaviorists, therapy dog trainers, survival bloggers, even a popular YouTube channel that wanted to fly her and Skylar out for an interview. She said no to all of them. But then a call came that made her stop mid-step. "This is Captain Rhonda Velasquez. I oversee the Sierra Valley K9 training division. I believe you have a dog we used to know." Natalie didn't speak for a moment. Then, "Ghost." The captain chuckled softly. "So he told you. His name's Max now." "Fair enough," Velasquez said. "We made a mistake. Years ago, labeled him too independent. But from what I've seen, maybe we were the ones who didn't know how to listen." Natalie stayed quiet. "We'd like to meet him again," the captain continued. "Offer him the chance to finish what he started." No expectations, no re-enlistment, just recognition. A kind of closure. Natalie turned to Max, who was lying beside Skylar, head on her foot like it had always belonged there. He didn't move, didn't lift his head, but his tail gave a quiet, almost imperceptible thump. The drive to Sierra Valley felt longer than it was. Max sat upright in the back, eyes scanning the trees and road signs like they meant something. Natalie had packed Skylar's favorite books, snacks, and a stuffed duck, but she stayed unusually quiet, head resting against Max's shoulder. The facility wasn't much to look at from the outside. Just a long, low building set against the pine-covered hills, with a training field marked off by flags and a dozen orange cones. But the moment Max stepped out of the car, something shifted. He didn't bolt, didn't resist. He walked forward with measured steps, his gait stiff but steady, ears high. Like he remembered this place. Not with fear, but with unfinished business. Captain Velasquez was waiting near the entrance. She had grey hair tucked into a tight bun and wore boots caked with red dirt. "Welcome home, Ghost," she said, then caught herself. "Max." Max paused beside her, then licked the back of her hand. The next week unfolded like a strange, wordless reunion. The trainers brought out old scent boxes, hazmat samples, metal decoy pipes. They watched Max sniff each one, then sit down, quiet and still, in front of the correct match every single time. No barks, no showboating, just precision. Natalie stood behind the fence, arms crossed. A mix of awe and guilt. She didn't know. Maybe it was just the knowledge that Max had carried all this training with him, invisible but intact, and no one had ever given him a chance to finish. Until now. On day 4, Max froze in front of one of the cadets. Natalie noticed it first. A small shift in his posture, a widening of his stance. The way he leaned his head, just slightly, as if catching a sound no one else could hear. Then came the low, quiet growl. The cadet young, maybe 19, went stiff. "What's wrong with him?" he asked, stepping back. Velasquez walked over. "Nothing's wrong." "He's warning you of what?" She sniffed the air, then frowned. "Take off your pack." Reluctantly, the cadet removed the canvas bag slung across his chest. As soon as he did, Max's growl stopped. Velasquez opened the bag, pulled out a crushed Gatorade bottle, a broken flashlight, and then, at the bottom, an old propane torch canister. "Did you leave this in here?" The cadet's face went pale. I forgot it was even in there." "You were on the live fire course yesterday," she said sharply. He nodded, mortified. Velasquez turned to Max. "He shouldn't have been allowed near the grounds with that." Max sat back down, calm again. Natalie couldn't help herself. She muttered under her breath. "Still doing your job, huh?" Velasquez overheard. "That dog's not just finishing his program. He's rewriting our manual." At the end of the week, they held a small ceremony. No cameras, no medals, just a row of cadets, a flag, and a single plaque. K9 Max, formerly Ghost, trained to detect danger, rejected for being too alert, proved right when it mattered most. Velasquez handed Natalie a folded certificate. "He's not just a pet." You know that Natalie nodded. "He never was." They turned to see Skylar hugging Max's neck, whispering something in his ear. Velasquez smiled. "You planning to keep him in retirement?" Natalie looked at Max. Max looked back. "We'll see," she said. "He seems to keep deciding that for himself." As they walked back to the car, Max stopped at the gate. He looked out over the field one last time. No bark, no sound. Just a single glance back, like a soldier walking off a battlefield he finally won. Then he trotted ahead, tail high, and the gate closed behind him. The first time Eli stood in front of the community center crowd, he couldn't look anyone in the eye. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him. A folded brochure about home gas safety trembled slightly in his hand. The room wasn't full. Just a mix of retired veterans, new homeowners, and a few teenagers brought in by their parents. He cleared his throat. "I'm not a professional speaker," he said. "I'm just a guy who made a mistake that almost cost my daughter her life." There was silence. Then a cough. A chair creaked. "I didn't call the right people. I thought I could fix things myself. I didn't check the valve on the replacement tank. And I didn't believe the dog when he tried to warn me." He paused. "The gas leak wasn't a fluke. It was preventable, and so was my arrogance." And that's how it began. Eli didn't go to jail. The county agreed to drop potential charges in exchange for a formal agreement, community service, public safety education sessions, and a mandatory certification in residential gas safety through the state fire marshal's office. He passed with the highest score in his cohort. Maybe guilt was a good motivator. He didn't move back in with Natalie and Skylar. Not yet. Not until he'd earned more than a clean slate. Meanwhile, Natalie packed up what was left of their life in the guest house. The scent of charred drywall still lingered in corners, no matter how many candles she burned or windows she opened. She stuffed Skylar's favorite books into boxes, kissed the top of Max's head every few minutes, and tried not to cry when she folded Eli's old flannel shirt and shoved it to the bottom of a drawer. They moved into her mother's house in Hillcrest, a quiet neighborhood with a big fenced backyard and too many wind chimes. It wasn't home, not yet, but Skylar had her own room with cloud stickers on the ceiling, and Max had a patch of grass he liked to dig up at 3 a.m. Natalie let him. He'd earned it. One morning, a padded envelope arrived in the mailbox. No return address. Inside, a gold-plated badge on a small wooden plaque. Etched into the top. K9 Max, Survivor. Protector. Witness. There was no note, no signature, just the emblem of the National K9 Alliance in the bottom corner. Natalie ran her fingers over the lettering. "You got your title back," she whispered. Max wagged once, then laid his head back down on the hardwood floor. His left ear twitched. The town paper printed a Sunday feature titled "The Dog Who Knew," complete with a 2-page photo spread and interviews with fire officials, gas line specialists, and even Captain Velasquez from Sierra Valley. But the part people remembered, the part that got clipped and taped to bulletin boards across the county, was a single quote from Skylar. When asked what Max meant to her, she had replied without hesitation, "He didn't bark for attention. He barked because he loved us." That line ended up on mugs, t-shirts, and even the county's fire safety posters. Max, for his part, took it all in stride. Fame didn't change him. He still hated the vacuum, still snored like a grown man, and still growled at door-to-door salesmen. But there was something different in the way people looked at him now. Not pity, not fear, respect. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. A little boy from Skylar's new school ran up to them in the park, panting, cheeks flushed. "Is that the gas dog?" Natalie braced herself. "Yes," she said carefully. "That's Max." The boy nodded solemnly, then turned to Max and held out a peanut butter cracker. "You saved a girl. My dad said you're a hero." Max sniffed the cracker, then gently took it from the boy's hand. The boy beamed. "Can I pet him?" "Only if he says it's okay." Max sat down, tail giving one slow wave. Consent granted. The boy hugged him like they'd known each other forever. Natalie turned her face toward the sky, blinking back something hot and sudden in her eyes. Maybe this was what rebuilding looked like. Not a grand speech, not forgiveness handed down like a sentence. Just one moment, then another, then another. That night, Natalie found Eli standing outside the Hillcrest house, hands in his pockets. He didn't ring the bell, didn't knock, just waited. She stepped out quietly. "I heard about the badge," he said. That's incredible. He deserved it. I know. I was wrong. About him. About everything silence passed between them like a fragile bridge. "I'm not asking to move back," he said. "Just to help where I can. However I can." Skylar's laughter floated out from inside the house. Then Max padded to the doorway, paused, and looked straight at Eli. For a second, Natalie couldn't breathe. But Max didn't bark. He walked slowly over, stood in front of Eli, and did the one thing no one expected. He leaned in, rested his head lightly against Eli's leg. Eli froze, then knelt, arms trembling, and pressed his forehead to Max's. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Max didn't flinch. Forgiveness doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it's just a stillness, a shared breath, and a quiet night that doesn't end in disaster. Rebuilding had begun. Not fast, not perfect, but real. The new house sat quietly on the edge of Willow Creek, just where the old guest house once stood before the fire. But this one was smaller, sturdier, and built with the kind of care that only comes from second chances. The siding was plain. No luxury fittings, no designer flourishes. Just cedar panels, a wide porch, and reinforced safety features tucked into every corner. There were new gas lines inspected 3 times, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors hardwired and tested weekly, and a crawl space reinforced with concrete in case of flooding. It wasn't just a home. It was a statement, a promise that nothing would be taken for granted again. 6 months had passed since the explosion, long enough for seasons to change, short enough for old wounds to still ache when pressed. Natalie stood on the front steps, arms crossed loosely over her chest, watching Skylar wobble across the grass on her unsteady toddler legs. Her curls bounced as she walked, her hands outstretched like she was balancing the whole world on invisible string. Right beside her, every step, every falter was Max's. He never trailed far, never took his eyes off her. If she tumbled, he was there first, steady and still, letting her pull herself up by his fur. If she laughed, he wagged. If she ran, he trotted. If she napped, he curled himself into the crook of her knees like a sentinel made of breath and patience. They were inseparable now, bonded by something that didn't need to be spoken. The kind of loyalty you couldn't train, only earn. Max hadn't been back to the firehouse, hadn't needed to. The world had already changed around him. His job wasn't chasing bad guys or sniffing out danger anymore. His job was her, and he did it without question. Inside the house, the scent of paint still clung to the walls. Cardboard boxes sat half unpacked in corners. The dining table was borrowed from Natalie's sister. The chairs didn't match. The kitchen backsplash was unfinished tile work that Eli had promised to come back and fix once he figured out how to cut glass corners, but it felt whole. Natalie traced her fingers along the doorframe. There were new notches carved into it already, tracking Skylar's growth. "You're going to outgrow this frame before we ever stain it," she murmured. A screen door creaked. She turned to see Eli, standing awkwardly with a small potted plant in his hand. A peace lily. "Thought this might help warm the place up," he said. "It's supposed to be hard to kill." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Kind of like us, huh?" He half smiled, half winced. Trying to be helpful. Not poetic. She took the plant. Their hands brushed, and for a moment the old tension threatened to resurface. But then Skylar shouted from the yard, something unintelligible and full of joy, and Max barked once, low and content. And just like that, the moment passed. "Come on in," she said softly. "We were just about to eat." That night, for the first time in what felt like years, they sat around the same table. Natalie, cautious but soft. Eli, quieter, more watchful. Skylar, covered in mashed potatoes, proudly feeding bites to Max under the table. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the trees like old memories passing through. Inside, it was warm. Not perfect, not healed, but warmer. Natalie cleared her throat midway through dinner. "I talked to a friend at the shelter," she said. "They're starting a pilot program with therapy dogs. Veterans with PTSD abuse survivors. They need animals that are calm, loyal, safe around kids." Eli looked up. "You thinking about volunteering?" Natalie shook her head. "I'm thinking Max might want a job again." They all turned to look at him. Max was stretched out on the kitchen rug, one eye lazily open, tail tapping the floor in slow rhythm. He didn't bark. He didn't jump. But something about the way his head lifted, ears twitching slightly, said more than words could. He was listening, still serving, still watching. Natalie leaned back in her chair, a long breath leaving her chest. "We lost a lot," she said quietly, "but we built something new. Stronger, not just a house." Eli nodded. "A life." Outside, the moon crested above the tree line. Skylar yawned, and Max, as always, was right there, rising before anyone else, walking beside her to her room, lying down with his back against her crib, as if to say, "This, right here, is my post, my duty, my home," not because someone told him to, but because he chose it. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the ridge when they gathered out front. The new house sat quietly behind them, its cedar walls glowing in the late light. It wasn't a grand ceremony, no cameras, no ribbon cutting, but it felt more significant than any award show Natalie had ever seen. A simple plaque had been mounted at the base of the oak tree Max liked to nap under. The metal glinted with clean edges freshly bolted into the ground, rooted like it belonged there. The engraving read, "He didn't bark for glory. He barked so she could live." Skylar toddled over in her tiny sneakers, running her hand across the plaque like it was part of a storybook. Max was beside her, of course, his greying muzzle lifted to catch the breeze, his eyes half closed as if he knew this was the end of one journey and the quiet start of another. A small group stood respectfully nearby, firefighters, local police, a few neighbors who had followed the news coverage. No press. Just people who had seen what mattered and came to honor it. Captain Reeves, a seasoned officer from the K9 unit who had once overseen Max's early training, stepped forward. His voice was deep but gentle. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "I have to ask. When we pulled his file, we saw he'd been renamed Max after retirement, but his original K9 call sign was Ghost. Do you know why he was called that?" Natalie paused, her hand on Max's head. She looked at the oak leaves swaying above, the house they rebuilt. The little girl now crouched beside her dog, feeding him bits of apple. Then she smiled. "Because some heroes haunt us," she said, "in the best way possible." Captain Reeves blinked, nodded slowly. "He's one of the good ones," he said. "No," Natalie replied. "He's the best." There was silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel empty, the kind that wraps itself around a group of people who've just been reminded of something bigger than themselves. And then a teenager stepped forward, a local volunteer from the animal shelter. She looked barely 16, holding a notepad and her phone in the other hand. Her voice was quiet. "Can I ask, what's your story with a loyal pet?" The question floated into the evening air. Natalie didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, there wasn't just one story. There were dozens, hundreds. Each one whispered in the wag of a tail, the press of a muzzle against a tear-streaked face, the quiet steps following a child down the hall. Max was a soldier, a protector, a survivor. He was also a bedtime guard, a storm watcher, a peanut butter taste tester, a scarred creature who refused to let pain define him. He wasn't perfect. He was better. Later that night, Natalie uploaded a single photo to the shelter's community page. It was Skylar, curled up asleep on the porch, her fingers buried in Max's thick fur. He was awake, head lifted just enough to see the world. The plaque sat behind them in the frame. She added one line. "For those who bark not for attention, but because they know someone needs them." Within hours, comments began to pour in. Photos of other German shepherds, rescue dogs, veterans with their service animals, parents sharing the first dog that taught their child to speak, survivors showing how one bark saved their lives. The story of Max of Ghost had gone beyond the fire, beyond the bite scars and the media frenzy, and even the rebuilt home. It had become a symbol of second chances, of protection without hesitation, of how even the most broken among us can become a protector for someone else. And so now, as Skylar grows, that story will grow with her. And Max? He's not a ghost anymore. He's the reason the house feels like home, the reason Natalie can sleep through thunderstorms again, the reason a little girl walks into the world every day knowing she's never, ever alone. If this story moved you, if you've ever known a dog who saved you in ways words can't describe, share it. Honor them. And subscribe to German Shepherd to keep these stories alive. Because somewhere, a dog isn't barking for glory. He's barking for someone he loves.